There is a story that I have heard told, and maybe you have too. There's a woman who's a very holy woman. She loves God. She has faith in God. And she spends her days in prayer and goes to church every Sunday and does all the right things that she thinks she's supposed to do. And one day in her community, there is a flood. A flood is announced, and she thinks to herself, I'm going to be fine. God will save me from this flood. So she does not evacuate when everybody's told to evacuate. Everybody leaves the town. She says, no, I'm good. God's got me. I don't need rescuing. And then the floodwaters start to come. She's hanging out in her living room, and a fire truck comes along. And it has to be a fire truck because at this point, the floodwaters have gotten so high that cars can't get out. They will flood. A fire truck comes along with its higher clearance, and the firefighters wade in their large waders, and they say, lady, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be evacuated. Come on. And she says, no, I'm good. God's got me. God will rescue me. And they're like, well, we can't forcibly remove you, so okay. So then the floodwaters keep coming. She gets a little nervous. Then she goes up to the second story because the floodwaters are starting to rise. It's too deep for cars to come anymore. And along comes a boat, Good Samaritan. And they see that there's still a person in this place. And they say, knock, knock, knock. They drive along to her window, her second-story window in her bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. We're here to rescue you. Come on, let's go. Let's get out of this floodwater. And what does she say? What would you guess? God's got me. I'm good. And God light my lantern here? Yes. Aha. I'm fine. Go on. I don't need rescuing. God's got me. So they say, okay, we can't crawl in and drag you out, but I don't think this is the smartest move. She's like, I'm fine. Guess what happens next? The floodwaters coming. I can tell some of you have heard the story. The floodwaters keep coming. So she's like, wow, God's taking a long time. I'm going to go out on the roof. She's sitting there on the roof waiting for God. Anytime now, God, it would be good for me. And a helicopter comes. Go, 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 go. Hey, lady, what are you doing here? We'll lower a rope so you can climb up in the basket. They lower the rope. She's like, I'm good. God's got me. And the helicopter's like, we can't force this lady into the basket. So they go to find other people who will accept help. And the floodwater keeps rising. And the woman perishes. She drowns. She gets to heaven. We know this is a story because there is no such thing as, well, I don't think, gates, but maybe you do at heaven. She gets to the pearly gates at heaven that we've heard about, and she is mad. God greets her, hi, beloved child. You're here earlier than I thought, but hey, we're glad you're here. And she says, I believed in you. I thought you would save me. I waited for you to rescue me. And God says, I sent an evacuation order and a fire truck and a boat and finally a helicopter to rescue you. And you turned me down each of those times. So what does this have to do? That was the punchline. I need to work on my joke delivery. That was the punchline. So what does this have to do with a psalmist many, many years ago writing about a king, an anointed one? You might be wondering. This psalm is the first of several psalms and that we will be talking about. And this one, as Alan mentioned, is what's called a royal psalm. It's written probably to be repeated at the coronation of a king. And in the book, Invitation to the Psalms, Rolf and Carl Jacobson tell us that the Psalms understand God's faithfulness, this is a quote, as a faithfulness that is often mediated through others. God's faithfulness is a faithfulness that is often mediated through others. That is, God often works through others. A creature might be the means by which God works faithfully at one moment, and yet that same creature might experience God's faithfulness by a different means at another moment. Today is a day when we often celebrate Epiphany, this star that guides the wise ones to Bethlehem. Our church celebrated Epiphany last Sunday with our star words and the arrival of our wise ones in a story that Shannon told. But Epiphany is often understood as some kind of enlightenment, some being able to see. And it's a period between Christmastide and Lent when many of the scriptures that are chosen for us are intended to reveal Jesus' divinity toward us or to us in him. It's designed to help us see the ways in which Jesus was divine. So Epiphany is about being able to see something anew or understand something that is right there, right there. And I wonder sometimes if we get trapped in seeing things the same way as the woman who is waiting on God. We might look at what is happening around the world and wonder, where is God in all of this? We watch the waters rise and we think, how can we reconcile a God who would let people drown? How can we live into this series of looking and seeing where God is, of experiencing being held by God, of talking about the ways in which God's got the whole world in God's hands, in her tender care, when we see a possibly looming Middle East war on the horizon, desperate migrants being tricked into getting on buses, which return them south and separate them from their families. And sometimes our personal lives deliver up wrenching news. And when our brains and attention is consumed with these tragedies, as is reasonable, we miss the enlightenment, the epiphany, the helicopter hovering overhead, the fire truck driving by. And we don't see all of the hands pulling babies out of the rubble, and the doctors operating with no medicine, no electricity, the therapists working with the women who were raped as a terrorist act at a music festival, the peace workers among us, quietly and without fanfare, healing generational conflict. We miss the way a grandparent shows up and tells their grandchild through their presence that they matter, that God's holding their life. We miss the ways in which, like rain coming down on the meadow, like showers watering the earth, God's presence in our midst, God's holding of our lives through other hands, through other creatures, through the act of loving one another. This Epiphany series will be reflecting on all the ways that God is holding our lives. All of our lives. Sometimes that might be us holding others. That might be others holding us. That might be experiencing being held through a walk in the woods, through noticing the help that arrives. Perhaps the challenge for us this Epiphany season is to see it, to allow us to see it anew. Perhaps the gift for us this season is seeing all around us God's presence, holding us. Let's look for it together. Amen.